You're going to wear the white windscreen? Don't you think that's a little distracting?
First off, I'm gracious enough to let you have the black windscreen because I'm a nice guy. Second, I'm getting white hairs in my mustache, and now it's just starting to happen in other places too. Welcome back to Review TV viewers. Chris Nichols here.
Jordan Drake here.
And I've got a Panasonic S1 in my hands right now because Panasonic has just released a whole bunch of firmware updates. Really awesome stuff.
Yeah, some major firmware updates on a lot of their camera models, including the BGH1, S5, the S1 that you're holding right now, and the S1H that's recording us right now, because this is already like the 7th take, and we want the camera that doesn't overheat filming us, because I'm not good at this.
Yeah, why are we comparing the two? Well, because a lot of people are going to look at what the S1 gained as far as video features go and what the S1H has and has gained for video features. And, they might be wondering, which one is the better buy? Which one should I go for? Now, if you're a photographer, I do still absolutely recommend the Panasonic S1 over the S1H. First off, it is more affordable, which is a bonus, but it also has some handling features and design features that just make it better suited for photography. I do really like having this toggle switch here. On the S1H, this becomes another record button, but I rather have this for photography where I can customize it to, switch between mechanical and electronic shutter or a myriad of other choices. It's really nice to have that. Also, if I am shooting sports or action and I'm filling up the buffer, shooting off a lot of frames in sequence, it's nice to have a CF Express / XQD slot to really clear that buffer off nice and quick, as opposed to the S1H with just dual SD card slots. You also get slightly sharper stills out of this camera because there's no low pass filter, no AA filter to subtly blur the image. So I like that. Most people are going to appreciate that. And really now with the firmware update, the S1 has a lot of the video features of the S1H. I mean, we're basically getting the same high-res modes and a lot of other features, so it kind of begs the question, do I even need to go to an S1H? Is this as good a video camera? Well, we are going to explore that now. Jordan, eyes up here, man. Eyes up.
I'm sorry, your windscreen is so distracting.
I'll block it with the camera. Is that better?
I appreciate that.
All right, so I can get through this talk on this. So, the Panasonic S1 did get a big upgrade here, right? I mean, we're being able to shoot 6K recording, 2:3 ratio, 24 frames per second, 5.9K at 16:9 ratio, up to 30 frames per second. I mean, that's something that we do use quite often on the S1H, and honestly, that was one of the main reasons why you would go upgrade to an S1H. So, what gives now?
Yeah, absolutely. And we looked at the quality when you're doing those high-res recordings, 5.9K and 6K, and they're basically identical between the S1H and the S1. The S1 is even maybe a smidge sharper because it doesn't have that AA filter. Now, the big difference is you do have a record limit when you're doing those high-res modes on the S1, where there's no record limits with any of the record modes on the S1H. And I love using those high-res modes for things like interviews or live music. You can pull different camera angles from them, and that could be a real problem. The other thing I was worried about is overheating. I am back behind my electric drums by popular demand because you told me it looks cool. So we're filming on the S1 right now in 5.9K at 24 frames per second. And it gives you a 15-minute record cutoff when you're in this mode. Now, usually I wouldn't record A-roll because I'd assume it's going to overheat very quickly. But the other night, I recorded a series of 6 15-minute clips. Now, it was in room temperature. That's as hot as I'm getting in Canada right now. But I was able to record for over an hour and a half, and the overheat warning still wasn't on the camera. Now, Panasonic said they put these 15-minute requirements in case you're recording in 40 degrees Celsius. But if you're not in those situations, I really don't think you're going to have to worry about overheating with this camera. Of course, with the S1H, you just never have to worry about overheating because it's got a fan in it. Anyways, back to Chris and I in the park.
So Jordan, I think we should talk about RAW recording next because, I mean, the firmware updates have brought big advancements to the S1H as well as the S1 now.
Yeah, I always thought it was super weird. You had the S1H that could record ProRes RAW and the S5, the lower end body, but not the S1 that sat right in the middle. So now the S1 gets ProRes RAW, and it's nice. It has a full HDMI port, so if you're planning to shoot a lot of RAW video, S1 makes more sense than the S5 in some regards.
Now, the S1H pretty early on had RAW support, and I mean, Apple wasn't really supporting the creative controls like ISO or white balance, but that has since changed. It's been updated, and so the S1H has all that, but now the S1 with its firmware update gets the exact same suite. I mean, again, it kind of begs the question, why would I go to an S1H when I've got now basically the best ProRes RAW recording capable in the S1?
That's actually the really big upgrade for the S1H that we just got. It now supports BRaw recording, which is Blackmagic's format for editing in DaVinci Resolve, and that was the real problem, is ProRes RAW It's natively supported in Final Cut. You could get plugins for Avid or Premiere if you wanted to work for it. But if you're editing on Resolve, or especially a lot of people just use Resolve for grading, then you weren't able to bring those files in. So now you've got an option that's going to work with those.
Okay, so I mean, I'm a DaVinci Resolve user myself, so that would be an issue if I had an S1, and that does make sense. But beyond that, is there really a quality difference? I mean, we've done some tests on BRaw and ProRes RAW, and really you can make one look like the other pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's such minor differences in like tint or the amount of sharpening on it, but it's a very similar video. I wouldn't pick one over the other for quality reasons. You can just kind of make it work with your workflow. And if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, I recorded a very long conversation with Gerald Undone that you can check out on his channel talking about that. But basically, rest assured, if you're editing on Resolve, use BRaw, and if you're cutting on the other ones, edit in ProRes RAW, you're getting the same awesome quality and lots of controls.
Now, the Panasonic S1H has always utilized a dual gain sensor like a lot of cameras do nowadays, and this is especially important if you're shooting raw or log video because you can choose a low range or a high range. If you've got lots of light and you want the best dynamic range possible, you can shoot the low setting. This will go to 640 ISO by default, and you'll get really nice video quality. But let's say you're in a lower light situation, but you don't want to get too much noise. Well, then it makes sense to use the high setting. This goes to 4000 ISO as a default. The great thing about the S1H that set it apart from the S1 was that you could choose this setting, and it was very important because you would have creative control over that. On the Panasonic S1, this uses the exact same dual gain sensor, but it never gave the option to choose low or high. Now we have the firmware update here with the S1, and it gives you that same low and higher range, putting it on par with what the S1H could do. It seems to me like if you're not a DaVinci Resolve user and, you know, the record limits, it can be a problem, but only when you're shooting 5.9 and 6K, not really any of the other modes. It sounds like the S1 makes a lot more sense as a video camera. I'm getting basically the same quality, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper.
Well, even in software, there are some major differences between them. So for starters, the S1 does have waveforms, which I love, but it doesn't get the vector scopes that are available in the S1H for setting your white balance and checking your color. On top of that, a lot of people need time code in order to synchronize multiple cameras, and I love on the S1H, you could actually plug an adapter into the sync port and it'll let you dial in a time code. Now, there's a sync port on the S1, but it's not going to output the time code. There's apparently something internally, so you're not going to get that in firmware either way. And also, you have all-eye compression. Now, it's a heavy data rate, 400 megabits per second when you're recording in 4K mode, but it's going to be a lot easier on your editing system. Now, I don't find there's a major quality difference. I've never really seen one between all-eye and IPV, but sometimes you want all-eye compression, and it's a shame it's not going to be there for the S1.
Okay, but Jordan, okay, hang on though. Okay, with the exception of time code, and who, time code, right? I mean, vector scopes, all eye would be nice. That could be added in firmware later to the S1, right?
Those could be potentially, but there's just some physical hardware things that they're never going to be able to add in firmware that the S1H has.
Like what?
For starters, you get the best articulating screen design I've ever seen. It's like a regular fully articulating screen, but you can also tilt it for low angle shots or to keep the screen away from the cables. You've also got a power switch right on the shutter dial. You've got a record button on the front of the camera. So if you're filming yourself, it's really easy to get to, but also if you rig up the camera in a cage, it's a lot easier to access. And you've got a front face pin on the bottom of the camera. So when you put your tripod plate on there, it's way less likely to be spinning around on top of your tripod if it gets loose.
Okay, but Jordan, but that makes your camera heavier, like 150 grams heavier. That's like a 13th of a knock. That's actually really not a lot, actually, at all. So, I mean, regardless which camera is better for you, I mean, hopefully this video helps you guys decide that. These firmware updates are pretty substantial.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, if you're an existing S1 user and you kind of felt abandoned over the years, this is...
like when the S5 comes out and you're like, where's my RAW?
Yeah, right? Yeah, this is huge. And I think if you're doing photo and video as a hybrid shooter, this has now become really powerful for the price point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the S1H still definitely has its place. I think it's just a little bit more niche now. Like, if you're going to be on bigger sets or you're going to use those high resolution record modes for long times, it makes a lot of sense. But a ton of people doing like smaller commercial work or web video, stuff like that, the S1 is going to do everything that they need and more for a lot less money.
Well, thanks so much for joining us in this video, guys. And if you enjoyed it and found it useful, please subscribe to the channel. Just a friendly reminder that if you don't subscribe to the channel, we've got a huge in with Panasonic, and we have come to a deal that they will not release any more firmware updates for any of their cameras until we get more subscriber numbers. So I'm going to leave that one up to you. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining us. Please do check out dpreview.com for tons of great articles and content, and we will see you guys very soon for another episode of DP Review TV.